Okay, we are in chapter 8, 1 Corinthians chapter 8. In many ways, we think of chapter 8 as really not being applicable to us because it is speaking about the food that is sacrificed to idols. But I think that if we see this as just an illustration, just an example of the things that we deal with today, then we realize that it does apply, and as we go through it, hopefully we will be able to piece together the things that we do that will violate this principle and why we need to apply it to our own lives. So we'll read through it first and then get into it piece by piece as we go through this particular subject. So starting in verse 1, it says, "Now about food sacrificed to idols, we know that we all possess knowledge. Knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. The man who thinks he knows something does not yet know as he ought to know, but the man who loves God is known by God. So then, about eating food sacrificed to idols, we know that an idol is nothing at all in the world, and that there is no God but one. For even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is but one God, the Father, from whom all things came and for whom we live. And there is but one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom all things came and through whom we live. But not everyone knows this. Some people are still so accustomed to idols that when they eat such food, they think of it as having been sacrificed to an idol, and since their conscience is weak, it is defiled. But food does not bring us near to God. We are no worse if we do not eat, and no better if we do. Be careful, however, that the exercise of your freedom does not become a stumbling block to the weak. For if anyone with a weak conscience sees you, who have this knowledge, eating in an idol's temple, won't he be emboldened to eat what he has sacrificed to idols? So this weak brother, for whom Christ died, is destroyed by your knowledge. When you sin against your brothers in this way and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if what I eat causes my brother to fall into sin, I will never eat meat again, so that I will not cause him to fall." So for us, we have to try to make application of this passage, and hopefully as we go through it, we'll build a better case for this applying to us today. So starting in verse 1, notice he addresses the concept of knowledge and what we understand to be knowledge. I was thinking about an illustration of how to maybe contrast what we consider knowledge and contrast that with what God knows. Probably the best way I could do it would be if I went out into the parking lot. So imagine me walking out, go out into the parking lot, pick up a whole bunch of sand between all those bits of gravel out there, and I dust it off until there's one grain of sand in my hand, which you wouldn't but even see right now. Imagine I've got one grain of sand right here. Well, that's the sum total of man's experience. That's all of his knowledge. That's all he ever had, all he ever has right now, and all he ever will have is in that one grain of sand. And think of that in comparison to a beach or to the whole earth. And now you begin to grasp God's knowledge in comparison to our knowledge. It's amazing how we get just a little bit of knowledge and all of a sudden we think we're really smart, don't we? Everyone knows where the term sophomore comes from, right? Sophomore is two Greek words. Sophia, Sophia, which means wisdom or wise or knowledge, and more from the word moron. Okay, so a wise moron or a clever idiot, whatever way you want to describe it, that's what it is. The most dangerous person in the world is a sophomore of any form. They have just enough knowledge to get themselves in trouble. So when I became a sophomore, my teachers reminded me of what I really was. Clever idiot. I think in general humans are all clever idiots. We are all wise fools. Because when we compare ourselves to God, we are really nothing. A drop in the bucket doesn't even describe it. Paul here is trying to get us to connect knowledge with God. Knowledge with God's wisdom. And then it begins to make sense. And that's why he here connects the idea of knowledge with love. And we know that God is love, right? This is from David Lipskin's commentary. It says, this passage here that we just read shows that learning without religion, or learning without God, the only basis of love, is not helpful to the world. Knowledge by itself is just really a waste of time. It's a pursuit of madness. I came across this interesting illustration. Just to preface it, you know that most of the great universities of the world were founded by Christians of some form. Most great universities of the world, you name one, and it was probably founded by a theological school. Harvard, probably one of America's greatest universities, you can debate that, but probably one of the greatest, was started as a theological school. One of its original mottos was this. Well, I won't tell you what it is yet. Anybody know what Harvard's motto is? It's on that little shield. Anyone remember? It is in the form of 3 words, but it's actually 1 word. Veritas. And it stands for truth. It's Latin for truth. Veritas. Well, originally it wasn't veritas. It was something completely different. Originally it stood for truth for Christ and the church. That was one of its original mottos. It changed. It had a couple of variations to it. I think even before that it was for Christ's glory, I think was the first one. And then they changed it to this one, which I think is more apt to an educational institution. But later on they dropped for Christ and the church. Okay, and one of the illustrations they use when they look at it is Harvard, you know, it has the 3 books, symbols of knowledge. Well, originally the 3 books would have these words, veritas, on it. The 2 top books were face up. The bottom book was face down. And it had to do with the fact that man was inferior to God in knowledge. Well, if you go look at the motto today, all the books are face up. Because unfortunately, man thinks they're smarter than God. Once we take God out of most of the equations in life, I would venture to say probably every equation, we have problems. If God is not guiding the knowledge that we have, that we seek, then we have a major problem. Now think of that in terms of technology. Isn't today a symbol of knowledge, technology? How do we use technology today for good? Or how good are we at using technology for God? If you think about it, most of technology today in terms of human usage is sin. It's anti-God. Doesn't mean it's necessarily bad, it's just a tool. But we've got to use it correctly. And here Paul is connecting the idea of love and knowledge. It's not enough just to know. Now you have to use that to better someone else. You have to help somebody else with that knowledge. I've used this illustration a lot, and I think it's really appropriate for us as a church. You know, many times when people get upset, they get frustrated with the church, they complain. They complain that there's something the church is not doing. There's something the church does not know. And when they get to that point, they decide they're going to leave. They're going to go somewhere else. So they do. Now, that's an exact issue that we're dealing with right here. If you know something we don't know, and it's not connected to love, you'll take it and you'll use it somewhere else. But if you know something we should know, and you connect it to love, then you'll use it here. You'll stay here, and you'll help us get to know what it is you know. I think it's selfish. Okay, the game doesn't go my way, so I pick up my ball and I go home. Right? You remember those days? Okay. Love connects with knowledge and it becomes useful to the church. Otherwise, it's useless. It's just a way to irritate, frustrate, and manipulate. Okay, look at the next verse. He says, the man who thinks he knows something does not yet know as he ought to know. I think this is a hard lesson for us to learn. We think we've sort of arrived, I don't know, intellectually, technologically, we think we've arrived. Everybody acts as if they've finally reached this sort of pinnacle. Do you think we're at the pinnacle of knowledge today? We're nowhere near it. 100 years ago, do you think they were at the pinnacle of knowledge? Can you imagine when they invented the steam engine? Man, the world's going to change. Now there are planes that are heavier than a steam engine and they fly in the sky. It's ridiculous. Can't even imagine that. My father-in-law took a friend of his to the airport one time, and this guy, he worked with him. He was a guy that basically grew up in the tribal lands. He was a black man. And so my father-in-law and him drive into the airport, and they pull up onto the runway. Back in those days, they could do it. I think they were picking something up or dropping something, if I can't remember. And they came up close to this 747 jumbo jet, and my father-in-law said to the guy next to him, said, that thing is going to take off in a little bit and it's going to fly away. And the man said, no way. And it's true. There's no way a plane should fly. Defies all logic. And yet it does. But you see, we think we can invent a plane somehow. We're so smart. I think 100 years from now, we're going to be very surprised as to what we can do. But you know, what do we do with that knowledge, that technology? How have we made the world a better place? Sad thing is, we can take one thing that produces so much good, and we can turn it into the same thing that produces so much evil. If love is not connected to it, it's really just a waste of time. In 1 Corinthians chapter 1, earlier, Paul made this statement. He said, for since in the wisdom of God, the world, through its wisdom, did not know God, God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached to save those who believed. And we talked a little bit about this in the beginning, that God turned everything upside down. He flipped it all around. We think we reach some sort of place of comfort, some sort of place of strength, some place of control when we get more knowledge, when we have more technology. We think somehow today we are better off than those who lived 100 years ago. Are we? I could say we know better off. Because I tell you what, 100 years ago, those people thought that they were better off than the people that were before them. That's just how it goes. Unless that knowledge is connected with God, unless it's connected with love, it is meaningless. In 3 he says, but the man who loves God is known by God. Okay, one of my pet peeves, and I've talked about it before, is the concept that we somehow have some kind of personal relationship with Jesus. That's nowhere found in the Bible. It's a fake, false teaching. I mentioned in class a few weeks ago, I think it's really sad if someone believes that they have a personal relationship with Jesus, because the problem with that is that I don't. Why do you get to have a personal relationship with Jesus and I don't? Why is Jesus talking to you specifically and he's not talking to me? Why does he say good night to you and good morning when he doesn't to me? See, it all depends on what we define that personal relationship as. If you notice this phrase right here, it's really interesting. It says, the man who loves God, is known by God. Jesus said, if you love me, you'll obey what I command. We think we will somehow know God. I don't think we'll ever really know God. I think someday we'll get an idea of what God is like when we meet Him. But here, if we really want God to know us, we need to be doing what God said. And it's not the knowledge of just knowing, intellectually knowing. This word here implies a relationship. This word here implies a connection. God knows everybody. Isn't that interesting? See, the truth is, God knows you just as well as He knows the person that's not here today, the person that'll be lost, the person that never comes to Him. He knows that person as well as He knows you. What's the difference between that person and you? It comes down to this. That person doesn't love God. He doesn't care what God says. He's not going to do what God says. He's going to do what he wants. But those who know God actually are the ones who love God, because by loving God, that connection is made. In 2 Timothy 2:19, Paul wrote this. He said, "Nevertheless, God's solid foundation stands firm, sealed with this inscription: The Lord knows those who are His. And everyone who confesses the name of the Lord must turn away from wickedness." That's that love part of it. But God knows those who are His. That's the difference. He looks out into the world and He sees those who are not His, and He's saddened by it. Then He looks into His family and He sees you and He says, "That's somebody I know." And it brings joy and pleasure to Him. But it's because of this connection to Him by our faithfulness. If we love knowledge more than God, ultimately, where is that going to get us? You'll have less in the end. That's what it'll turn out to be. But if you love God more than knowledge, in the end you'll have both. Anybody in here like Indiana Jones, the series? Okay, kind of a crazy series if you think about it. But at the end, you remember the last one? Kind of blew my mind. But anyway, we have aliens and all these weird creatures. And you'll remember in the movie, if you've watched it, there's a woman that's pursuing this idea that somehow she could get, I don't know, knowledge that'll sort of transform her into something special. She wanted the gift of knowledge, basically, is what she was seeking. And all these aliens pour all their knowledge into this person. Do you remember what happens to her? Okay. I always think of a human brain. If God could pour all of His knowledge into our brain, what would happen to it? You'll be dead. I don't think it's humanly possible, but people try anyway. In verse 4, "So then, by eating food sacrificed to idols, we know that an idol is nothing at all in the world, and that there is no God but one." So he's addressing their problem, because he says, "So then," about eating food sacrificed to idols. So this is one of their questions. What about food that's been sacrificed to idols? Well, he begins with what we know. What we know. Can you really be, if you understood that there is only one God, can you really think that you could somehow do anything meaningful if something is connected to made up gods? Is there any way that could happen? He's saying, no, there's no way that could happen. We all know there's only one God. So who is this talking about? Who is Paul talking about here? If we know there's only one God, who is the we? Ever thought about that? Who is the we? So in other words, who is the strong? Okay. Herman simplified it. If you know there's only one God, then you that person. Now the thing is, do you know there's only one God? You may say those words, you may believe in your own mind, you may believe those words, but do you actually practice those words? I would challenge you to think that the answer is no. I think we intellectually understand it. I think we may believe it. The problem is, do we really practice it? Everyone see this table right here? See these words right here? What does that do for this table? If next Sunday you came in and you found out that I removed this table, anybody feeling any emotions yet? See, we give things value, we make them special, we honor things. So these words are important, but this table itself, it's useless. It's a tool. But you see, we hold on to things, don't we? We give things value without even realizing it. You know that there are some people, and you might even be sitting in the class today, that if I went and did something inappropriate on this table, you'll be highly offended. What that tells me is you don't understand that yet. See, you haven't made God the sole object of your worship. Things get in the way. Now, Paul's not saying it's not a problem of it preventing you from entering eternity. That's not what he's saying, and we'll see in a moment. But what it is it's all these things that are part of being human, part of living in the world, that people give value to. He's already said there's no other gods, there's only one God. Can you eat meat sacrificed to idol? Yes, you can. But some people just can't handle that. They can't deal with that. You probably know of churches that do some very unusual things, and they probably believe many of the same things you believe. Some of them may even believe that they are the stronger brother, and they have a greater faith than yours. But you know, there are churches that won't have kitchens. There are churches that do not have Bible classes. There are churches that will not put a cross on the wall. There are churches that have all kinds of hang-ups. Do they all matter? No. Doesn't mean anything. But people get bent and twisted about things. They get bent out of shape about things. So what does that mean for us? And I think this is the most important part. What is the strong's response? We can't just say, suck it up, get over it. Get back there. That's what he's saying. So look at verse 5. He says, for even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is but one God, the Father, from whom all things came, and for whom we live, and there is but one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom all things came, and through whom we live. Okay, that's what we have to internalize that and make it a part of our lives, so that some of these things around us that bug other people because they don't know, they don't understand, they don't bug us. That's where we need to get to. That there are some that can't, they just can't get there. There's something in their past that they're holding on to. They just can't let go. They have an image or an idea of what a Christian is, what the church is, what God is. They just can't let it go. Some of us in this room have come from other denominations. We've been taught with other ideas. And then we begin to study for ourselves what the scriptures really say. And slowly we let go of the past, and slowly we let go of human teachings. But there are some things we find it very difficult to let go of. I have family members that the women, when they enter worship, have to have a head covering. Can't go into worship without a head covering. In spite of the fact that Paul says God gave you your hair as a cover, they have to have a head covering. They've got that from somewhere and they've pulled it into the church. I have family that believe that a woman cannot have short hair. So ladies with the short hair, you're out. Sorry. Because a woman is a woman and she's defined by her long, beautiful hair. So long that she doesn't cut it and she trips over it and falls and dies. Well, okay, at some point you've got to cut it. Okay. Doesn't it get to the point of ridiculous? What do we do with these people? So he says in verse 7, but not everyone knows this. He says some people are still so accustomed to idols that when they eat such food they think of it as having been sacrificed to an idol, and since their conscience is weak, it is defiled. But food does not bring us near to God. We are no worse if we do not eat, and no better if we do. So there's a practical part of this. You know, whether we put these words on this table and whether this table has any value other than just a wooden table, or whether it does or doesn't matter. To the strong, it doesn't matter. If you were to be offended if we took these words off the bottom over here, it doesn't matter. To the strong, they don't get offended by it. If these words are on here, to the strong, it doesn't matter. Who are the strong? Perman said the strong are those who believe that there is only one God. And I challenge you to think about the fact that if you believe there's one God, if you know, if you accept it intellectually, it's a whole other thing understanding it completely and living it completely. Now I want you to think about things right now that may be holding you back. Think of all the things that you've said to yourself. I don't like it when they do that. I'm stepping on Jamie's toes. Was I supposed to say that real loud? Oops. Hey, there's things that I don't like. I just don't. It's not a matter of right and wrong. I know that. Intellectually, I know that. But I still don't like it. And if I have a chance to change it, I will. Because it's about my will and not yours. However, it's not a right and wrong. I think that's a problem we have. We see things as right and wrong all the time. It's not a matter of right and wrong. It's what people can get over. It's what people can do without. It's how people can develop more dependence on God. How can we move from being human to the spiritual being that we are inside? How can we become more spiritual? Now, we can't leave the body. We can't live spiritually, because you've got to have food, you've got to sleep, you've got to have water. Okay, there's parts of us, but see, that's the balance that we're trying to find in life. So I want you to think this morning of the things that perhaps on your list that offend you when people say or do something. Or maybe there's something here at North Texas that you don't like. Yeah. 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 Sacred sites, yes. You know, even the world today kind of grasps that concept, don't they, about holy sites? Now, if we believe there's only one God, are there any holy sites? Intellectually, I'm not saying emotionally, because emotionally you may have a holy site. You see, there are no holy sites. And that's hard, because how do we convince the world of that? 2,000 years, yeah, over holy sites. Can you imagine that? We're fighting over dirt. Yep. People say religion causes all the ills in the world. Well, it should. Because ask the question, does it matter what I believe? If you say it doesn't matter, then why fight? But if it matters what you believe, then you're going to fight. Whether you believe right or wrong, it doesn't matter. You may believe completely wrong, you're still going to fight. Hey, that's why we have wars with people that don't know what they're doing. Okay? That's why we have wars with really, even in human terms, completely ignorant people. Because they have a belief system and they're going to defend it. But that's exactly what Paul is saying here. What belief system do you have? Now, I'm telling you this morning that you have on your list, because I know I do on mine, a lot of human beliefs. And I've got to slowly slide those off and throw them in the trash. And then work on the next one. Doesn't mean I'm going to like it. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy. Doesn't mean it's not going to frustrate me sometimes. Doesn't mean I'm not going to have a relapse. But I've got to think about those things that are on my list. Now the question this morning is everyone's list the same? Okay, you've all got a list. If you don't think you have a list, raise your hand. Okay, good. No one raised their hand. Okay. Everyone's got a list. Now here's the problem, is your list more important than mine? Hey, I'm the preacher. My list is always more important than yours. See, that's a human thing. No, it's not. The elders have a list. Is their list more important than mine? No, it's not. It's not. Because those are human things. My list is no more important to you than yours, and yours is no more important than mine. Because you know, those are matters of opinion, aren't they? That's what I think, what I believe. Paul is saying, even though those are things that really they don't make any sense, we still have to consider the fact that somebody can't get over those. Why would we want to hurt somebody who can't get over those? So you know what I do? I find out what's on your list. That's what I do. I find out what's on your list. But I don't tell you what's on my list. That's what I do. Now I'm stronger, see? And then I ride you on every point. It's like frustrate you. And then you leave the faith. That's how I do it. And I stand there and go, I am the strong. No, I'm only strong because you haven't found out what's on my list yet. Because if you found out what was on my list, you're going to ride those ones, and before long I'm gone. But why would we do that? We all have a list. We all have a problem being human. So in verse 9 he says, be careful, however, that the exercise of your freedom does not bring a stumbling block to the weak. So I have no problem with this table being here, and I have no problem with this table being gone. Okay, now, but if I find out one of you likes this table being here and likes the words that are written on here, then I'm going to be certain that this table stays here. Because I'm trying to help you. Now, it doesn't stop there, right? Ignorance is not bliss. Okay, ignorance is death. Ignorance will kill you. So in time, hopefully, we can discuss and you can grow, and eventually you get to the point where you're going to say, you know what, if this table is here, or if it is not, it is okay. But then you're going to find out somebody else is going to say, no, I really think that table needs to be there. I don't think you can have a church of Christ without a table with in remembrance of me written on it. Well, then that table stays there. And that's why that table is still there today. It's true. That's why that table is there today. You're too practical, Mark. I appreciate Earl Grey. You know, Earl Grey made that podium that was up there. And somebody said that podium should be gone. And Earl said, let it go. Earl made that podium. Should we have done that to Earl? We didn't know. We didn't know. We did that to Earl. We told Earl, you know, that we need to get rid of that table. We need to put something up like that. It's more modern. People can see through it. It's visually more appealing instead of the old traditional big podium. I take part of the blame, but not all of the blame. I was raised Catholic, so I really tried to get one of those big ones. You know, you walk up into it and it goes up, and it's a big tower, and it's up like this. Then I can look down at you and I can do this. That'll make you feel better, won't it? No. But you know what? Earl said, you know what? It needs to go. I wonder what made Earl say, you know what? It needs to go. What's that? Okay. But maybe there's something else. He doesn't think a thing should be put in the way of people and people growing. He doesn't think a thing should be in the way of people who are being comfortable. Now, some of you probably don't like that podium. If you don't like the podium, raise your hand. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. I think there is a line, but I think it's dependent on the person. I think sometimes we cross that line, unfortunately, and we do it too fast and we offend people or we hurt people. I think if that ever happens, I think the other person hopefully will know that we're trying to do it for their betterment. It's hard. And at some point we are going to offend somebody, aren't we? At some point, I may come to you personally and say, you know what, we've talked about this. It's been 10 years. We've had many occasions to overcome this obstacle. We are now pulling off the Band-Aid. Deal with it. It may come to that point. Because the weaker brother may be using that as a tool to control or manipulate. And I've seen that happen too. We play possum, don't we? You see, we have a phrase, don't we? The squeaky wheel should never get the oil, but it does. Going back to what Mark said, it's practical, isn't it? After a while, you get so annoyed by listening to the squeaky wheel, you give it the oil. But there is that time, I think. But I think that's what Paul is trying to say, is we got to be patient with each other. Someday the weak brother will be the strong brother. Someday those who are weak in their faith will be those who are strong in their faith. Now, if they are growing, maturing, they will. I think it's very impressive to see people mature in their faith. And some people mature really quickly, don't they? Aren't we impressed? Aren't we impressed when we see somebody just by leaps and bounds, every time you talk to them, you notice changing in them? It's impressive. But we need to be aware of the fact that we need to be helping each other. I think that's what Paul is trying to get here. If you're strong, then you need to help the weak. Okay, God is strong. So what's he hanging around with us for? Because God is love. And the strong protects the weak.